There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. And we're here on ACIM Gather with Bruce Rawles and Lynn Johnson. And we just finished reading The Journey Home by Dr. Kenneth Wapnick. And wow, it was a learning experience for me for sure. I'm so very grateful for the opportunity to have done that. And right now we're getting ready to start reading Absence from Felicity. And I will, let's see, how can I get this? I know what I can do because I'm not on the same computer. Yeah, and exactly. All right. So we're going to uh, be, let's see. I'm trying to figure out all this stuff I can do here. All right.
Sure, sure.
All right. So yeah. So I'm asking everybody to mute themselves if you are not already muted. And in fact, if I put no, I will. If I put mute all, will it mute people when they come in? Probably. I don't know. You'll have to unmute and so me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All good.
All right. Very good. All right. So there we go. So yeah. So how are you doing, Bruce? Are you?
I'm well, thanks, and looking forward to this. I was just kind of reflecting on, we spent 3.5 years prior to this going over The Journey Home, which is one of Ken Wapnick's brilliant masterpieces. I think right up there with all his three series of books on the text workbook and the manual, the journey through the series, journey through the text, journey through the workbook, journey through the manual. He's written so many wonderful books, and his videos and audios are just tremendous. And I can't say enough good things about him as my go-to source for inspiration about the course. And I'm sure it's true for a lot of other course students. And so I'm very much looking forward to rereading The Absence from Felicity, which is his biography about Helen Schucman. I did make a quick blog post about this reading, and I put it in the chat. Maybe you can, well, actually, you know what? Well, when other people come in, I can add it again. But
Yeah.
the Amazon description of the book is this biography of Helen Schucman, the scribe of A Course in Miracles, dictated by Jesus, focuses on the lifetime conflict between her spiritual nature and her ego, the relationship of this conflict to her scribing of the Course. The book includes extensive excerpts from Helen's own recollections, the personal messages she received from Jesus, and her dreams and letters, all never before in print. Presented here as well is some of the personal instructional material from Jesus. This material constituted an integral part of the original dictation of the Course, which was later removed as directed by Jesus. Absence from Felicity highlights the process of the Course's scribing, Helen's personal experiences of Jesus, and her relationship with William Thetford, her close friend and a psychologist colleague at the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City, as well as her collaborator in the scribing of A Course in Miracles. The last part of the book contains reminiscences of Helen by Kenneth Wapnick, the author, which draws upon his intimate relationship with the scribe that spanned the last 8 years of her life. Finally, in the context of Helen's experiences, there is a discussion of Jesus which focuses on the appearance and the reality of our relationship with him. So that's really, I think, important. And so I'm just gonna read what I put in this little blog post on ACIM blog, very hastily written this morning, about the last 25 minutes. Starting this morning, June 17th, 2023, Lynn Johnson and Bruce Rawles will share weekly Saturday morning conversations, 7:30 a.m. Pacific time, on ACIM Gather online radio. We'll read from and talk about Absence from Felicity, the story of Helen Schucman, and her scribing of A Course in Miracles by Kenneth Wapnick, Ph.D. Unlike most of the brilliant books by Ken Wapnick, this book is primarily a biography, yet intersperses her personal fascinating account with countless insights about ACIM's metaphysics. Helen's story is really everyone's story in the sense that we all have enormous resistance to accepting the truth of our real inclusive identity. Helen once said about the Course that came through her, "I know it's true, I just don't believe it." Judy Skutch Whitson, the original publisher of the Course, evidently responded to Helen upon hearing this remark, that perhaps the remark should have been, "I know it's true, I just won't believe it." This resistance is what we're all working through with the help of our inner kindness teacher. So anyway, that's just my very quick intro to what we're going to be talking about going forward. I suspect since this book is actually, I think, a little longer even than The Journey Home by a few pages, it's 500 plus. And I think the one we just finished, The Journey Home, was just a little under 500. Unless we pick up the pace, which it might be possible. It might be another three years or so that getting through this one. But it's been a delight going through the previous books we did. And prior to The Journey Home, we read and discussed Gary Renard's fourth book, Lifetimes When Jesus and Buddha Knew Each Other, A History of Mighty Companions. And that was a wonderful read, and I thoroughly enjoyed that second reading. So I'm very much looking forward to this second reading, and love the fact that we get to share it together, Lynn, you and I, and with whoever else is listening, and then on from there from the recordings. So thank you again.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think it might not take as long, because the journey home, it was like every paragraph we could have stopped and talked for an hour.
Exactly.
This is more kind of story kind of stuff. So.
It is. Yeah, I think we'll be able to read longer swaths of text.
We'll see, though.
we'll see. We'll find out. Yeah. I'm not concerned about the pacing at all. But that may be easier to do, since we'll probably have, since the metaphysics is interspersed rather than just undiluted, as in most of everything else Ken has written. There may be more opportunities to just read without too much interruption in longer swaths.
Exactly.
Longer stretches. Yeah.
Exactly. So welcome everyone who's here. And I guess we're ready to start reading.
Yeah.
With the preface. I'm not going through the stuff before that says how to read the Course in Miracles and what all the stuff. Because
I figured we start with a preface too, so we were on the same page, literally and figuratively.
well, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
All right. So preface. Helen Schucman. The subject of this book was the scribe of A Course in Miracles. From October 1965 through September 1972, she, quote unquote, heard the voice of Jesus dictating to her the 3 volumes that comprise one of the most significant spiritual messages of our time. This book, in part, is the story of this dictation, set in the context of Helen's lifetime search for God. One afternoon, several years after the course was completed, Helen and I were sitting on her living room couch, our favorite spot when the weather was not conducive to walking. We began to discuss the distortions about her life and the course's origins that were already beginning to be heard, and this at a time when she was still very much alive. Imagine, we thought out loud, what would happen after she was gone. Helen, incidentally, seemed rather certain that she would die at the age of 72, that being the number written on her tombstone she had seen in a vision. In point of fact, she died about 5 months short of her 72nd birthday. This is really pretty interesting. I'm just stopped here for a second. She thought she would die at the age of 72. 7 plus 2 is 9. And she died on February 9th, my birthday. So maybe.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's pretty crazy. But
probably best to not try to read too much into that, right?
I know, but it's funny to me, because every time I see anything that, adds up to 9, or I always, for some reason, I think about that. Lots of people have died on my birthday, by the way.
I would guess statistically 1 out of every 365 people has died on their birthday.
Lots of them. Yeah. But people that I knew, or people I knew of.
Yeah.
People have that. Okay. So in point of fact, she died about 5 months short of her 72nd birthday. While I do not recall the exact date of our conversation on the couch, it was most likely around 2 or 3 years before Helen's death in 1981. It was mutually understood by us that her unpublished autobiography was hardly a true and accurate account of her life, being rather an overly stylized literary rendering. Wow, literary rendering. Her public stance, that did not truly reflect the deeper level of Helen's feelings and experiences. Our one attempt to correct the inaccuracies and edit out the distortions, while an improvement in some places, proved in many others to be even worse than the original. Recounting certain events in her life, especially those of a religious nature, and even more specifically, those events surrounding A Course in Miracles, aroused tremendous anxiety in Helen, and her discomfort directly led to an almost fierce over-editing that affected the faithfulness of her life's retelling. It was out of this context, therefore, that I said to Helen that I would write her story, as well as the related events, inner and outer, that preceded, accompanied, and followed her, taking down the course.
Can we pause there for a moment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think what that points out to me is Helen's discomfort and awkwardness, perhaps, of having her writing her own story. I think is probably, again, indicative of the discomfort that we all feel of making a big deal about the personal self, and I think that's something that we all probably, unless we're aware of our egotistical leanings, and now I'm going to quote from another of Ken's works. I just finished listening again to one of his wonderful, brilliant commentaries, an audio program on Shakespeare's Macbeth, and how he talks about Macbeth knew what he was doing, and at least that he was upfront about it. And I think when we're upfront about the fact that we place our ego above everyone else's ego, being a silly, seemingly separate self, at least there's a part of our mind that's acknowledging the absurdity of that, and it's only natural to feel discomfort in something that really is an act of war upon perfect oneness, ultimately. But so I think that's Helen is to use a non-gender neutral pronoun, every man, but really every one of us is really grappling with that same challenge of how do I reconcile a self that I seem to be, a little s self, with something that I know on some deep level of my mind is my reality. And if those of us who've studied the Course for a while begin to have suspicion that maybe our true reality is one of a shared identity, and what if that was true?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So for me, when I was reading this, I was thinking about when I had been writing my story. Somehow or the other, some people have talked me into, oh, you need to tell your story. So of course I decide, well, I guess I will tell my story. And when I started writing, I started getting like so upset when I was thinking about things that happened in the past, and or agitated, not angry or sad, but just revisiting the past was not a very pleasant thing. And I not because I had a terrible past, because I think every past is terrible. I mean, there's not a there's not a good past, or else it's still
I think what you're doing is it sounds like you may be starting to generalize, as the Course might suggest we all do, that any dream of separation is really a nightmare, no matter how much we want to sugarcoat it or whitewash it or make it seem more palatable. There's not enough sweetener that you can add to a turd to make it a delight to eat. Right?
Oh yeah, no, that's what Cheryl Valentine used to say, like putting whipped cream on a turd.
Yeah. Exactly. Or gold spray paint, as Alexander Marchand.
Yeah, or as the Mythbusters actually polished one. Yeah.
I think I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so, but no matter what it is, it's still the same.
It really is. Yeah.
But at the time, then I had to start asking, well, what's the purpose of this? Why am I putting myself through this?
Yeah.
And if I really, it was, I really wanted to revisit a lot of things that had never been clear in my mind, and was able to really learn to see things from a completely different point of view.
Mhm.
And it just really shifted a lot of stuff in me. But while the time I was doing it, it was so um, difficult for me. And there was a song that I just put on like replay over and over and over. And it's just like a little song where she's just singing, know you are loved, rest in peace, dream your sweet dream till your soul is released. I mean, she just sings that over and over, much more beautifully than I'm singing it, but I'm kind of
That's very
growling
nice.
this morning. But but I listened to that. Oh, I mean, that was playing in the background the whole time, because that helped me to kind of relax and look at it from this different point of view. And instead of seeing, the fearful things that happen, which a lot of, Helen's life we're going to be reading about, and a lot of fearful stuff happened to her. Things that you would think now, oh my God, how can they have treated a child this way, or whatever. I mean, I always think about it, it just blows me away. But not that she was beaten or anything, she was just ignored, I think, it just in a really sad kind of way, and we'll see that as we read along. But anyway, that being enough about me.
Well, I think your story and my story and everyone's who's listening to this story and Helen's story are really on that level all the same. The course suggests that, and this is what I think we'll probably be doing throughout this reading, however long it takes, is bringing it back to the course's metaphysics, which can all suggest that we do. I can't stray too far from it, right? And that is the whole thought system of the ego, which is based on the erroneous belief in the ideas of sin, guilt, and fear. Sin being, in terms of temporal connection, our thoughts about the past. Guilt being the unconscious, largely unconscious guilt about the present moment that we think we're still separating from perfect oneness, from our creator and from each other. And then the fear being the future dread and of thinking that, well, God somehow, like the second law of, was it the third law of chaos, suggests that, God believes in our sin and guilt too. And so now he's coming after us. Well, in the ego's version of the lowercase little g God, yeah, that's probably, makes sense from that insane perspective that an angry God demands vengeance, upon his prodigal son, and yet the course says God doesn't know anything's happened. It's all part of a dream. And if that's the case, then fear becomes irrelevant, because the sin and guilt, the cause behind the fear is therefore unsubstantial. It doesn't have any basis in truth. And ideas don't leave their source. And if our mind has never left the mind of our creator, then there's no sweat. Advocated. Anyway,
Nothing has gone wrong.
nothing has gone astray except in a dream, a forgivable dream, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just crazy that we are so convinced.
Yeah.
So you want me to continue reading?
I'll read a little
Okay,
bit,
why don't you
and
read?
we can swap back and forth. Sure.
I'm happy.
Helen agreed that this was a good idea, which is taking down the course. And then, as one of us would often do, I quoted from our mutually favorite literary work, Hamlet. It was from the final scene where Hamlet is dying of the poisoned cup, and his trusted Horatio begins to drink the poison to join his friend in death. Hamlet quickly seizes the cup from Horatio's hands, exclaiming, "Oh, good Horatio, what a wounded name! Things standing thus unknown shall live behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from Felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story." And apparently that's from section 5, subsection 2. I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly, since I'm not a Shakespeare scholar by any means. And then Ken says, "I hardly think this is a harsh world, nor do I experience my surviving Helen as painful, nor did I think that way then. However, I had some premonitions of what the world would do to Helen, what a wounded name shall live behind me, in quotes, unable to resist the temptation to sensationalize, mythologize, or otherwise distort her life and experiences. This I knew would only obscure the truth of what was an inspiring and powerful story simply by being what it was without the need to have it conform to Hollywood standards. And so the need for a biography I would write, as I truly held her in my heart, that would more closely reflect Helen's experience, a life dedicated to bringing forth the message of Jesus, and yet a life that was in truth, in Helen's conscious experience at least, an absence from Felicity, and hence the name of the book.
Oh, that is
And
really interesting.
isn't it? Yeah. And again, it's all of our strive. I mean, if we weren't searching for something more peaceful, I mean, if everyone, even people that seem to have a life that seems to be going well, at some point, sooner or later, because of the way ego has set up this dream that we call our material existence, or the physical reality, or all the different names we ascribe to what we normally call life. The Course would say, that's all just a silly misunderstanding of a dream, and that we can wake up from. And the Course's prescription for that process it calls true forgiveness. And so we're all learning to do that by recognizing that the things that we thought happened to us have not occurred in truth, in eternity. Although within the dream, they seem very real, don't they?
It does, yeah. And it's just so beautiful that Ken kind of alludes it to himself as her Horatio, that stay and tell the world that I was not, or that what I really am, or what really happened here.
Mm-hmm.
And such a beautiful thing. And as you were reading that, I was thinking about all the other people who've tried to reinterpret Helen's life, and sure enough, when you hear about her today from a lot of people, that she was unstable, and she didn't she was over editor, and she ruined the Course with all of her turning it over to Ken, and all these things, and you're just like, what, where are these ideas coming from? But we still have this, which is as original as it can be, to the experience of Helen and her life, and other things that came later, just speculation. And like I said, at one time, it's like people went searching through Helen's underwear drawers, seeing, are there some notes in here? Is there something, that I can, take, and, oh, did Jesus say this? Order eggs next week. Oh, better put that in the in the book. I mean, people have this whole idea that everything that was in Helen's notes, or everything that came out of Helen at all, was, direct words from Jesus, like the Pope or something. And I really love how Ken did take on the role of Horatio um, to explain and help us understand her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're all the sidekicks of someone in some capacity, but I think that the idea being is that it's really the Course's emphasis on relationship that basically says, if we're all related, what if that the true relationship really is one of kinship beyond anything we can imagine? And I think the Course asks us to consider that by the idea of sameness, and Ken is brilliant in this, and in his emphasis that the one thing that we can truly say, if we think about it carefully, is that we all have the same mind, and through components of the mind, we all have the same insane mind, which the Course calls ego. We all have this same sane mind, which the Course calls Holy Spirit, and we all have the same decision-making faculty that's constantly choosing between those two. And so in that respect, we're all in the same boat. We're all fighting the same hard battle, and therefore all worthy of compassion, patience, and infinite tolerance. Right?
Yeah. And thanks for that, because I realized as I was going on just then, I was not being compassionate or tolerant or loving of people who I thought were misusing Helen's underwear notes. But
I've heard of sewing buttons on your underwear, but I haven't heard of using that as a metaphysical scribing media. But I guess there's room for every form of new media coming and going all the time, right?
Exactly. Yeah, like socks in the bread box.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Eight tracks and 33 and a third RPM records, and now it's channel material on underwear, right?
that's right. Or wherever she happened to be. Uh, so do you want me to continue reading?
Yes, please, because
Okay.
get us back on track from
All
the
right. All
underwear
right.
diversion.
So Ken continued. Indeed, some distorted accounts of Helen and the origins of A Course in Miracles have already begun to appear, and these do not do justice to one, Helen's true experience of God and Jesus; two, the uniqueness of what appeared to be her dual personality of a highly developed spiritual self, coupled with an almost equally highly developed ego. Who's like that? I don't know. And three, her relationship with William Thetford, that on one level was the direct stimulus and provided the setting for the transmission of the course. A major purpose of this book, therefore, is to chronicle the unusually ambivalent relationship Helen had with God and Jesus, beginning with her childhood and continuing on through the scribing of the course to the moment of her death in 1981. The book, however, is not a conventional biography, for it does not present a complete nor totally linear view of Helen's life, nor is it a psychobiography, a genre that has become somewhat in favor in our Freudian age. Echoing A Course in Miracles, this book reflects a particular point of view, namely that the aforementioned conflict in Helen between these parts of herself, wanting to return to God and the fear of such return, is the predominant theme in everyone's life, independent of familiar and or hereditary circumstances. This was a conflict that symbolized both sides of Helen's personality and reflected the same ambivalence we all share regarding our relationship with God and with the person of Jesus, whose love for us was the closest the world has come to experiencing the resplendent love of God, our source. In chronicling the development of this personal conflict and its ultimate resolution, I thus am writing everyone's story. The drama of this aspect of Helen's inner life reflects the inner life of all people, seemingly trapped in a godless world and wandering uncertain, lonely, and in constant fear. And that's a quote from text chapter 31, section 8. Yet all the time yearning to hear the call of the loving God that would lead them back to him. I therefore, for the most part, do not dwell on Helen's worldly life, the form, except as insofar as it reflects the underlying content of this conflict. Analyzing the ego is fruitless, as the Course repeatedly instructs us. On the other hand, understanding that the entire ego thought system is a defense against our true self is extremely helpful. Wow, I'm going to read that again, and it's kind
It
of
really is extremely helpful, isn't it?
yeah. I don't know if it's underlined in your physical book, but it's kind of got this weird little underlining here on the Kindle book. Analyzing the ego is fruitless, as the Course repeatedly instructs us. On the other hand, understanding that the entire ego thought system is a defense against our true self is extremely helpful. Thus, for example, Helen's clear ambivalence toward her parents and organized religion, providing a goldmine of data for a psychologist seeking to find psychodynamic causes for her inner experiences, is here seen as reflective of this deeper God-ego conflict, not its cause.
Mm-hmm. Get to the root cause, basically. That's something that I remember. Oh, gosh, it's been a decade, more than a decade ago, when I lived in Southern Oregon. A friend of mine helped me get a job working as a consultant for the Air Force by reading a stack of books on value stream mapping and learning about process improvement. I'd already had some very minimal familiarity with that subject, but one of the books that I read was talked about the Toyota, the automakers manufacturing technique of refining their process. They called it the 5 whys. And then what they would do is they would look at a production process for making cars, and they would try to find, well, what's really inefficient here, what's a waste of time and material and effort, and they'd say, well, why do we do things this way? Well, it's because we only had this, previously we only had this to work with or whatever. And then they think, well, gee, now that we have this, can we rethink this? But the approach was called the 5 whys, because they would say, well, in order to really refine the process and make it super appropriate and effective, we just need to keep digging for the deeper why. And I think so they ask, well, why do we do that? And then why do we do that? They just limited it to 5. But I think if we just keeping asking why about every thought that we entertain, kind of get to the sense of what Ken's comment in that last sentence is reflective of the deeper ego conflict, not its cause. We just have to keep asking, well, what's the real cause of my upset in the world? It's not whether or not my latest automotive purchase is working for me, regardless of the brand. It's like, well, what if the very premise of my existence is faulty? What if the little s self that I think I am, in a body with maybe a personality, is a totally fabricated, crazy idea, and my real identity is mine? And what if I share that identity with everyone else? That would change everything. And I think that's, again, like Ken is, even though this is, again, mostly a biography, it's almost impossible for Ken to not, through his writing, share the ideas that Helen's life really is, as he points out here, just a symbol of everyone's life, and our quest to go beyond the superficial and the denial of the truth and the resistance that we have to it, by means of just really looking at it without condemnation. And I think that's why he's giving it a wonderful objective view of a particular life, in order that we can generalize it to our lives and everyone else's lives.
Yes. And it's so beautiful that we can do that, because once we start generalizing or extrapolating or saying, this, all that's happening here is a repeating pattern. And we get caught up in the pattern repeating, and we don't actually question, is why is this happening over and over and over again? But it's the whole experience of being a human in the world is an experience of doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result, which is the definition of insanity. So, if we can see ourselves in Helen, which I did, I know the first time I read this book, which I really only have read it once, I did see myself in Helen a lot, and saw experiences that I had that were like Helen had, the same kind of thing, and realized that my resistance is equally strong. And it's just it's a reflection of ourselves. So, and it's beautiful. And so I love the way that Ken has explained this. And of course, how could he do any differently, because that's his point of view at the time he's writing this. His point of view is this is a gold mine of data.
Really is, truly is, yeah. And well, not only is a gold mine of data when we generalize it, but it's also fascinating too, because and he's pointing out he doesn't want this to become like some Hollywood treatment of some celebrity, because it's really everyone's story. But the fact that this is her struggles with the material in the course is indicative of what we're all working with. I mean, we all, I think just about any course student I know who has been looking into it for some time has noticed the phenomena of you read the course, and then 30 seconds later the doorbell rings, or there's a knock on the door, or there the phone rings or whatever, and suddenly we're, we're capable of enormous levels of distraction, and it's just really, we think it's the specific things in the world that are distracting us, but it's really our choice for wanting to dig in our heels and foot drag or whatever you want to call it, and really take our own time, which is fine. There's nothing in the courses that says you must do this. There's no demands whatsoever in the course. It's very much a self-study at your own pace kind of a thing, which of course the voluntary aspect is crucial to any successful learning situation. I remember when I was teaching classes in the California prisons over a couple of summers with my mom. We were teaching a course called Creative Dynamics, which had to do with positive thinking and mind, looking at your mind and one's attitudes about everything and everyone, and that was sort of precursor to me really getting into the course. And I remember the difference in the attitudes between the guys that were in the classroom that wanted to be there versus those that, when we walked up and down the main halls in the prison, and you could just feel the glares of directed toward us as we were going up and down the halls. It's like they didn't want us there. We didn't feel welcome from them. Whereas in the classroom, the ones that wanted to be there, it was a totally different experience. But that's true of all of our thoughts. When we want to be willing to look at our own minds, it's a totally different experience. But we're all ambivalent, and so it's like we have parts of our mind are like the inmates that want to be free, and other parts of our mind are like the ones that are damn well happy to be there. Happy in big quotes, right?
Exactly. And it's really funny. What you're reminding me of something that was in today's lesson, and I'm going to see if I can't bring it up here. I'll have to probably move the share to this, but no, let's see, stop that share. And I have a hard time with this little screen, share screen. All right. Speaking of ambivalence, that's the this lesson today, your grace has given me, I claim it now. He says, God loves you. He speaks to you. Do you not want to speak to him? He's not distant. He doesn't want to hide from you.
Mm-hmm.
We just want to try to hide from him, and we're suffering from deception. God, he remains entirely accessible. He loves his son. There's no certainty but this, yet this suffices. He'll love his son forever. When his mind remains asleep, he loves him still. And when his mind wakes, he loves him. And when his mind wakes, he loves him with a never-changing love. Sorry, I'm trying to speed through this. Then he goes on about, how happy you would be and how joyful it would be. And wouldn't it be wonderful to be in a place where you're remembering God and he's lifting you up in his arms, and you're just no longer asleep, and you remember that he loves you, and you remember that you love him, and all of that. But then he says in paragraph 4 something that just, you read all this stuff about how wonderful he is and how happy we are going to be, and what a great thing. And then you get to paragraph 4 and it says, God loves his son. Request him now to give the means by which the world will disappear, and vision first will come with knowledge, but an instant later. When you get to that point where your ego reads, request him now to give the means by which this world will disappear, at that point, all bets are off. Because no matter how beautiful all this stuff is that he's telling you, when your ego recognizes, oh, he's asking for me to go. He's asking for the end of me. And no matter how cheerful Jesus is as he goes on later and later in the lesson, there's still that thought that hit me when I read that, that this means it's the end of me. Anyway, I just wanted to share that thought, because I think that, when we're confused about, why people are ambivalent, and, when we recognize our own ambivalence, which is, recognizing that, no, I really don't want that. I say I want it. I think I want it. It looks really good. It sounds really good. What a wonderful thing, how joyful that would be. But then, what about my kids, and what about my cats, and what about my house, and what about my country, and what about my,
Yada, yada, right?
yada, yada. I see that, how this ambivalence is what we all share. And so, that's what we can work through.
Yeah, exactly.
And well, go ahead.
Oh, I was just reading some of, and thank you, Dove, and Gloria and others in the chat. I was just reading Dove's comments. Poor, deprived, lacking, mythical me. Isn't that it? I mean, that's that identity that never really serves us. We don't question that often enough, and in order for us to get the momentum going to question it entirely. But the course, I think the fact that we're drawn to the course, and the evidence that if you're listening to this right now, including you and I, Lynn, there must be a part in our mind that does want to undo that insane thought system, not by attacking it or demolishing it with the, weaponry or explosives or whatever, by recognizing that it never happened. That's the course's, challenging metaphysics, is that, and that's why we're all ambivalent, like Helen, is, we are not quite ready to let go of the idea that there's a separate self that may still hold some hope of working out for us. We still think that, maybe there's some hope for this Bruce character to have a happy dream on his own. And, but if we examine the evidence fairly and objectively with Holy Spirit's help, we'll see that, no, not really. It's the Dr. Phil thing, which I attribute to Susan Dugan, who, and I was reminded that was one of his catchphrases, is, how's that working out for you, kind of thing. I think the Holy Spirit, aka Jesus of the Course, asks us all the time. It's like, how's that working out? Well, if we're honest with ourselves, zero. I mean, the ego's track record is a big fat goose egg, zero zip nada, and that's because it couldn't possibly make. How could a dream possibly make us happy when we, on some part of our mind, we know that there's a reality that just knocks everything the ego could possibly do out of the park, and off the scoreboard whatsoever. In fact, out of the need to score or compare or any kind of dualistic dream. It transcends the dream of duality altogether, and the dream of ambivalence too, which is, again, so much of the emphasis of Ken's biography we're just getting into today.
Exactly. Yeah. So, have a little faith in me, the ego keeps saying, and we're like, no. I've seen what you can do. That's, that is the definition of insanity. You see what it can do, and you see what it does, and you just keep running back and saying, okay, well, let's try it again, and maybe this time we'll have a better result. And it's just ain't happening. We're just so gullible. All right, let us read on. Let's see. You want to read?
Sure. Now you're showing a different spot than where I left off, but oh, here, no, here it is. No, I got it. It's, yeah, bottom of page 3 in the print version.
Okay.
The ultimate origins of this conflict, however, lie buried still deeper midst ancient scars born on a raging battlefield of a transtemporal, that makes more sense, mind far greater than its tiny expression we call Helen Schucman. It is the mind of a larger post-separation self called the split mind or ego by A Course in Miracles, that is the source of our experienced personal self. Understanding Helen's life therefore provides a model for this ontological God-ego conflict that rages inside all people. As the two sides of this battle are recognized, they can be brought together and transcended at last. Well, isn't that what we're all trying to do? Transcend the insane thought system, of course, calls the ego. And Dove put in the chat, the only sure thing here is death and taxes and bills. Ego. Yeah. And of course, the 24/7 taxing, not just in April or whatever, is in this country, is the taxing thought system. And that's the tyranny of needs. I've just been re-listening to Ken Wapnick's wonderful audio on the tyranny of needs, which I highly recommend if you haven't heard it. But it talks about how the ego is really a need machine, and it really seems to thrive and prosper. Not really, but it certainly becomes a predominant nightmare anyway when we allow the needs that it demands and raise them to prominence in our mind by insisting that we're this little self fraudulent identity that has nothing but needs, because it's made out of a belief in deficiency, right?
Yes, absolutely. It is. Yeah. Lack is the number one component of the ego mind.
Yeah. I think we've got enough time to read the next 4 paragraphs, which complete the preface. If you want to read a couple, and I'll read a couple. How's that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. Excuse me. Helen, thus, not only left the world A Course in Miracles, in my opinion, the world's most psychologically sophisticated account of the mind's subterranean warfare, along with teaching the means for undoing this war against God through forgiveness, but her own life provided a model for its teachings as well. Very few, if any at all, knew fully that these two sides of Hamlet's things standing thus unknown, as a quote, things standing thus unknown, and it is this complex combination I hope to capture in this book. While Helen would not have wanted what I am to write to have been public knowledge during her lifetime for reasons that form one of the most important themes of this book, I know she would be pleased that I am right at this time presenting her story, and that of the course's beginnings, I therefore hope that this book will restore to Helen's reported experience a balance that has been heretofore lacking, and that will record for posterity the wonderful, if not painfully human story of a woman who remained absolutely faithful to Jesus, the one she both loved and hated above all others. Excuse me. And I have heard people say this is the book where Ken threw Helen under the bus. Because
Really?
Yeah, I've heard people say that. Yes.
I think he, well, what I, again, it's been probably a decade since I've read this or more, but I'm so glad we're reading it again together, starting today. What I seem to recall in my recollection of the book, having not really touched it too much in the interim, is the compassion that Ken showed to Helen in her struggle with the ego, which really is, as he has already pointed out, and it's what we've read in the preface so far, that's really everyone's struggle between the two thought systems. And it's really only the ego that struggles, and the Holy Spirit just smiles patiently like the Cheshire cat above the battleground, watching the Red Queen and the insane pawns of her empire duking it out with the black troops and whatnot. I mean, it's all just a crazy game that we made up of duality, and we just need to have infinite patience, as the Course suggests, and compassion that we only are going to have by trusting Holy Spirit.
Exactly. Compassion and true empathy.
Yeah.
And so I think that this to me was this book, we'll see as we go along. I don't think that at all. I think that this is really compassionate and really empathetic with Helen
Oh,
and
yeah,
her
yeah, yeah.
situation and her thought system and everything. So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and read the next paragraph and then I'll
Sure.
turn it over to you.
Okay.
And yet, all this being said, the love and hate, but veiled the love with a capital L in her that existed before time was and will continue after time ceases to be. For beyond the personal and ambivalent side to Helen rested a totally different self. In fact, capital self in quotations may be a more appropriate spelling, for this part of her inner life was totally impersonal and transcended the love-hate relationship with Jesus that in effect was her personal self. Almost always hidden in Helen, this otherworldly side nonetheless was the ultimate foundation for her life and gave it the meaning from which all else must be understood. And I'll turn it over to
Wow.
you.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I just want a comment on that first sentence. All this being said, the love and hate, lowercase l, love and hate, but veiled the capital L love in her that existed before time was and will continue after time ceases to be. I mean, again, that's everyone's story, isn't it? The real love that transcends time, space, individuality, and certainly the entirety of the ego's thought system of sin, guilt, and fear, is really, I think, what has drawn us to the Course. It's drawn us to anything that resonates as true. And as Ken points out, not only in this book but elsewhere, so much of his other work, audio, video, written and otherwise, the quality of and the clarity and the lucidity of Helen's work when she was channeling, if you will, and that's, I know, a word that's gotten used and misused tremendously in the last few decades, but when she was letting that awareness flow through her, she was incredibly clear, and I think the Course reflects that. When she was, asking Jesus, as I think we're going to read in this book, if I recall correctly, things like, where to go get a new pair of shoes or pantyhose or whatever. I mean, that's when, she had the experience of getting what she needed. But when she was starting to do things on her own, if you will, having it come from her rather than through her, that's when, she could be way off base, just like all of us. I mean, and again, that's where I think the parallels between Helen's life and our own are what Ken is trying to emphasize here, and how, we're all we all have a checkered appearance within the dream of our material existence, but our real identity obviously transcends that tremendously. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, all the experiences that I've had that I didn't really look at and say, oh, this is amazing. Now, after I read about Helen having experiences, I go back and rethink and relook at them. So this is a good chance to really, take into your heart things that have happened to you, that experiences with the Holy Spirit and reinforce them in your mind, because those should be the regular experiences, the normal experiences.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's what the Course is leading us to, is making that the norm rather than the insanity of the ego, is gradually transitioning from the craziness of the separate interest to the shared interest and the innocence that is at the heart of the Course's metaphysics, that we need to see all of our siblings as sinless and guiltless, and that's how we see ourselves. Yeah. Shall I finish the last two paragraphs?
Yes, please.
Okay. The last two paragraphs of the preface of Absence from Felicity, the story of Helen Schucman and her Scribing of A Course in Miracles by Kenneth Wapnick, Ph.D., reads as follows. This book, therefore, has two principal themes. The first, which predominates, is Helen's love-hate relationship with God and Jesus, what A Course in Miracles refers to as the conflict between our right and wrong-minded selves. The second, which runs throughout as an undercurrent, is the love of Christ that Helen truly knew and was, called one-mindedness in the Course. Although I shall make reference to this transpersonal self from time to time, especially in connection with Helen's recurring image of the priestess, I shall leave for the epilogue a fuller consideration of this aspect of Helen, letting the development of her personal side form the basic contours of this book. At the conclusion of Helen's personal story, I shall then return to this capital S self, as a composer concludes a symphony with a coda, the final episode that introduces new themes, yet which nonetheless remains intimately connected to the spirit of the music preceding it. Helen and I shared a deep love for one another and for Jesus, in whose love we knew we were joined, and on behalf of whose course we had come together. It is my prayer that I am able to convey that love in these pages. In the words that Beethoven inscribed over the opening measures of his choral masterpiece, Missa Solemnis, from the heart, may it go to the heart. Well, if we're reading a non-dual text that we call A Course in Miracles, then mi corazón es tu corazón. My heart is your heart, no matter who's saying it or hearing it, right? Or reading it.
Yes, exactly. So this is so beautiful, and I always, because I listen to Ken a lot, as you probably well know.
Oh,
I
me
have
too.
I don't even know how many recordings of Ken I have, but a large number of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hear like always the music and how he conveys his love of Shakespeare and music, and we're going to learn stuff from this book that we probably had forgotten or maybe never knew. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
too. I love that too. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, he wrote this out of love for Helen and love for the course, and the idea that that he had any thought other than total respect, and as he said, for those who are just coming into at the beginning of the preface, that it really is to correct people's understanding about Helen and correct a lot of the ideas that people were espousing about Helen, saying that she was, whatever. And even now, I mean, there's a lot of times even now that people will say, well, Helen did this, that's what I was saying earlier. They have very disrespectful to her, uh, and actually even sometimes calling her and Ken and Bill liars, and saying that they specifically took things out that Jesus didn't want them to take out, and that they, I mean, really just really crazy. Being that also, I was going to mention there's a webinar coming up next week on Thursday, I believe, from the foundation, and it's about it's kind of advertises like almost being about just what am I, gender fluid, all that kind of stuff. But what was that were left out of the course about sex? So there's going to be a conversation about what Jesus intended and was written that was not put in the actual course about sex. So if anybody wants that link to sign up for that, I can I'll put it in the chat, or I'll send it to y'all, and I'll send it when I send out this recording. So anyway, thank you so much, Bruce.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. I'm going to put our little opening, well, a very,
Yes.
very, very short a link to a very short write-up of what we're about to do and just started, and the chat there. And also, I'm always reachable through acimblog.com. There's a contact page there. And if anyone wants to learn more about what I do with the course, and I know there's tons of stuff that you do all the time with ACIM Gather, and acimgather.us is the place for that information. And I'm very much looking forward to another however many years or whatever it takes going through this, because we have such a good time going through this. And anyway, I appreciate everything that you do, Lynn, and look forward to the session 2 of Absence from Felicity next week.
Yay. All right. Thank you so much, Bruce. I love you, brother.
Likewise.
Keep us apprised on your moving situation.
Oh, you betcha. You betcha.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you next week.
Have a great week, all.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
Yes, thank you.